Thank you for this opportunity to present an overview of the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA has been unfairly criticized in recent years, and its protections are being unnecessarily eroded. We've heard in the press that CEQA is responsible for a great number of California's troubles, from homelessness to San Francisco's struggling downtown, to the state's decline in population. These arguments distract policymakers from addressing the true root causes of these challenges. Our presentation explains how CEQA actually works, how it has benefited California for over 50 years, and what objective empirical studies have found about the law. This presentation has 4 parts. 1. The history and purpose of CEQA. 2. How CEQA protects communities and the environment. 3. CEQA and housing. And 4. CEQA and infrastructure. Let's start with some quick background on the history and purpose of CEQA. CEQA was signed into law in 1970, at a time when the country was waking up to the need for environmental protection. CEQA was modeled after the National Environmental Policy Act. Before CEQA, large polluting projects could be approved without regard to the serious harm they caused to the communities and the environment. As former Senator Byron Scher famously said, CEQA became Californians' Environmental Bill of Rights. CEQA requires that public agencies disclose and mitigate the impacts of proposed projects before they are approved. During the CEQA process, public agencies receive input from the public about the project, how it will affect their communities. CEQA is our look before you leap law. Decision makers should know the effect of their land use decisions before they make those decisions, before it's too late to prevent harm or mitigate negative impacts. CEQA is designed to improve projects, not stop them. The CEQA process has resulted in better, more sustainable projects throughout the state. We will show you specific examples of CEQA's work, cases where the statute made a marked difference in every region of California. CEQA has 3 main elements. First, the lead agency for a proposed project must disclose the project's potentially significant environmental and public health impacts. The purpose of this feature is 1. To assist governmental officials in their decision-making about projects that might cause harm, and 2. To inform the public about projects that could adversely affect their communities. How are these impacts disclosed? There are 3 main environmental review documents. 1. Negative declarations are very short, consisting of a statement that the project will not cause any significant impacts. 2. Mitigated negative declarations acknowledge that a project had potentially significant impacts, but the impacts have been eliminated or reduced to a level of insignificance. 3. Environmental impact reports, also known as EIRs, are used when a project has the potential to cause significant environmental impacts, and these impacts have not been mitigated as part of the planning process. Since CEQA was adopted, it has been amended to ensure agencies are not required to conduct duplicative or unnecessary environmental review. For example, agencies can now tier their environmental review for specific projects off earlier programmatic EIRs that were prepared for broad planning documents like general plans. Full EIRs are therefore now quite rare. They are used only for major projects that have the potential to cause significant harm to public health or the environment. For example, one study showed that for all housing projects in San Francisco, there were just 7 EIRs in the 3-year period from 2018 to 2020. The second major element of CEQA is the mitigation requirement. Here, the lead agency must identify feasible ways to avoid or reduce the significant effects of the project. This mitigation requirement applies only to a project's significant effects, not to every small effect. Mitigation is the heart of CEQA. It is how the law improves projects. The third major element of CEQA is public engagement. CEQA is the only state law that allows for public input on land use decisions, and it is this public engagement that improves projects. Critics sometimes suggest that CEQA be replaced by a standards approach, where developers would simply fill out a checklist of requirements. But such an approach would deprive constituents of their right to have a voice in their community's future. CEQA allows members of the public to get involved in land use planning in a number of ways. Residents can follow public notices about particular projects, comment on environmental review documents, attend public hearings, and organize with their community. CEQA has important safety valves. First, the legislature has exempted many categories of projects from CEQA altogether. Indeed, most development projects in California are exempt. We will discuss specific exemptions for housing and infrastructure later. Second, even if a project has significant impacts that cannot be mitigated, the agency can still approve the project. The agency just needs to adopt a Statement of Overriding Considerations that gives reasons why the project should move forward despite its environmental effects. The reasons can be economic, legal, social, technological, or other reasons, and must be based on substantial evidence. Agencies frequently use this mechanism to approve projects. We now turn to a closer examination of how CEQA protects communities and the environment. CEQA protects the health of everyday Californians, such as those living near large industrial projects located in their neighborhoods. CEQA is the one law that requires public disclosure of these projects' impacts, enabling community members to get involved and speak up. Our first case example involves a massive rail yard project known as SCIG that was proposed to be located across the street from homes and schools in the low-income community of West Long Beach. Because the project would profoundly affect public health, 3 public agencies and several environmental justice groups brought a CEQA challenge, which was then joined by the Attorney General. The case was successful. The court held that the lead agency, the Port of LA, must conduct a proper analysis of the project's significant impacts on air quality, including its cumulative impacts. Residents of West Long Beach will breathe easier thanks to CEQA. This next example involved a large proposed Amazon warehouse project in South Fresno that would generate over 3,000 vehicle trips per day, or more than 1 million trips per year. Trucks from the project would travel along routes shared by children attending a local elementary school. With CEQA as leverage, the community reached an agreement with the developer to reduce the project's impacts on air quality, noise, traffic, and light and glare. CEQA did not stop the project, but improved it. No litigation was ever filed. In this case example, environmental and community organizations brought a CEQA challenge to Kern County's approval of an ordinance accelerating oil drilling throughout the county, including in vulnerable neighborhoods. The county's ordinance would allow nearly 2,700 new oil and gas wells per year. In 2024, the Court of Appeal found the county's EIR failed to adequately analyze the project's cancer risk to residents living near multiple oil wells, or to mitigate the project's impacts on groundwater levels across the county, especially in disadvantaged communities. The World Logistics Center is one of the largest warehouse complexes ever proposed in California. It would add over 14,000 truck trips each day, transporting goods from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach to the city of Moreno Valley. In 2021, a CEQA settlement secured nearly $50 million in mitigation and other commitments to protect the affected community. The development can happen, but the community must be protected. Now we turn to the subject of climate change. CEQA is critical to California meeting its climate goals. Indeed, CEQA is the only state law that requires that the greenhouse gas emissions of proposed projects be quantified and any significant emissions be mitigated to the extent feasible. We have 2 concrete examples. In a CEQA settlement, 2 Walmart supercenters in the Inland Empire agreed to install rooftop solar panels, efficient heating and cooling systems, and LED lighting in their stores. This case set an important precedent for requiring big box stores to minimize their greenhouse gas pollution. Newhall Ranch is an enormous project in LA County that would have increased GHG emissions by about 260,000 carbon dioxide equivalent metric tons each year. After the plaintiffs prevailed in a CEQA suit, the project was revised to include measures cutting these emissions nearly in half. Newhall Ranch is currently under construction, and people are moving in. CEQA did not stop the project, but improved it. CEQA helps local governments do their part in California's fight against climate change. Since 1970, CEQA has protected sensitive plants and animals in every corner of California. There are numerous well-known CEQA cases protecting California's splendid wildlife. Just 3 examples are suits protecting golden eagles in San Diego County, coho salmon in Marin County, and mountain lions in the Santa Ana Mountains. Along with the Williamson Act, CEQA has been the primary state law preserving agricultural and open space lands in California. These state laws are critical, given that California loses an alarming amount of farmland every year to development. For example, CEQA prevented the destruction of over 10,000 acres of farmland in the Bay Delta. CEQA also has preserved unique cultural resources throughout California. For example, a recent CEQA settlement requires California State University at Long Beach State to permanently preserve a sacred tribal site, which was listed on the state and national registers of historic places. It is no exaggeration to say California would be a different state without CEQA. This law has saved many of the state's most iconic places from destruction. For example, CEQA lawsuits ensured that the new resort developments would not destroy Lake Tahoe's famous water clarity, preserved old growth and redwood groves in the headwaters forests, stopped plans in the 1980s to fill large portions of San Francisco Bay, and preserved more than 20,000 acres in the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles and Ventura counties to mitigate for other development projects. Now we will discuss the intersection of CEQA and housing. In recent years, CEQA opponents have focused their criticism almost entirely on housing. They claim CEQA has caused the state's shortage in affordable housing units and assert that most CEQA litigation is challenging housing. These claims are unsupported by any evidence. CEQA has been in place for over 50 years through all of California's housing booms and busts. It did not affect the housing markets in past decades, and it did not cause the housing crisis now. Rather than impeding residential development, CEQA improves housing projects. It ensures that housing is safe and healthy, has an adequate water supply, and includes fire protection services. As we confront climate change, CEQA also ensures that housing projects in rural areas do not pose wildfire risks to new and existing residents, and that their greenhouse gas emissions are reduced to the extent feasible. CEQA also protects communities from gentrification and displacement. This is our first case example, showing how CEQA improves residential developments. In 2022, a Superior Court found that San Bernardino County had failed to adequately analyze the impacts on wildfire evacuation of a large subdivision proposed along Highway 38, adjacent to Big Bear Lake. Because of CEQA, the county will now have to fully consider and inform the public regarding the fire evacuation risk for new and existing residents. This next example involves a large project in Stanislaus County, which would have placed thousands of new homes in a remote, rural area without adequate fire protection. It took a CEQA case by a local fire district to force the lead agency, the City of Riverbank, to address the issue. In the end, the fire district and the city reached a settlement, under which the fire district will receive funding for the necessary fire protection services. CEQA has long been used to make sure there's adequate water to serve proposed new subdivisions. In this example, the East Bay Municipal Utility District brought a CEQA challenge in 2021 against Contra Costa County for approving a large housing development that lacked a stable water supply. The court found that the county had indeed violated CEQA. The project can move forward, but only if the county determines where the water will come from. This case benefited not just the residents of the new subdivision, but all residents in the service area. CEQA has also been used to ensure that new housing projects are safe from cancer-causing contaminants. For example, a community group in San Francisco's Chinatown is using CEQA to demand that developers of a residential project in their neighborhood clean up highly toxic chemicals on the site. CEQA improves residential projects, but critics instead repeatedly blame CEQA for the state's housing shortages. These claims collapse upon close examination and are an unfortunate and costly distraction. As long as CEQA remains the scapegoat, California's policy leaders will not face up to the true causes of the affordable housing crisis and will not find solutions. Several major authorities have published reports showing that CEQA is not a major impediment to housing production. These analysts include academics, environmental planners, and housing experts, and 2 state Senate committees. Independent studies show that a combination of economic factors impedes the production of affordable housing. These include high land and construction costs, high interest rates, widening income gaps, and developers timing the market. Other factors that have fed into the crisis include the lack of sufficient subsidies for affordable housing, the elimination of redevelopment agencies, which helped subsidize housing, concentration of ownership, high vacancy rates, and poor planning and/or zoning. These root causes of the housing crisis deserve more attention from policymakers. In many areas, housing projects have received all of their entitlements, but are still not being built. For example, in San Francisco, there are now over 53,000 entitled housing units that remain unbuilt. These projects completed the environmental review process, but were never constructed due to economic factors. Furthermore, the crisis in affordable housing is not limited to California, where CEQA is on the books. Even states with far weaker environmental laws are experiencing housing shortages. Even though CEQA did not cause the housing crisis, in recent years, numerous bills have streamlined or exempted a wide range of housing projects from CEQA. These projects include specified infill and multifamily housing projects, transit priority projects, homeless shelters, supportive housing, and housing in commercial areas. Even with these CEQA exemptions, California's affordable housing crisis continues. Because CEQA is not the root cause of the crisis, these exemptions did not solve it. Additional exemptions will serve only to erode the environmental and public health protections Californians depend on for safe and healthy housing. Californians have waited too long for the affordable housing crisis to be addressed. Here is a partial list of avenues that have been suggested and should be seriously explored. Subsidizing affordable housing, applying vacancy taxes, limiting short-term rentals, protecting tenants from displacement, and restricting corporate land speculation. Now we turn to the topic of CEQA and infrastructure. We have heard arguments that CEQA should be relaxed when it comes to building roads, bridges, pipelines, and other infrastructure California needs for the 21st century. This is a complicated subject. While certain green projects, like bike paths and rooftop solar, could be exempted, most large-scale infrastructure should undergo environmental review to ensure its impacts are mitigated. We can construct needed infrastructure and protect the environment. Before CEQA, large projects, dams, freeways, port improvements, rail yards, were designed without any regard for the environment or affected communities. Freeways bisected towns, damaging public health and changing community character forever. Enormous rail yards could spew pollution near homes and schools. Rivers could be altered and dams constructed with no measures to protect rare habitat and no mitigation for devastating impacts on Native American cultural resources. CEQA changed all of that. Lead agencies must now disclose and mitigate infrastructure projects' impacts on public health and the environment. We will provide examples of how CEQA has improved infrastructure projects in 2 different California regions. The Cypress Freeway in West Oakland was constructed long before CEQA was adopted. This elevated freeway was built on soil subject to liquefaction, and it bisected a low-income community. After the freeway collapsed in the 1989 earthquake, its reconstruction went through the CEQA process. As a result, the freeway was relocated away from neighborhoods to protect residents from air pollution, and it was built at ground level to prevent future collapse. Our next example is the Regional Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy, adopted in 2011 by SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments. This plan was not sustainable because it front-loaded freeway expansions at the expense of public transportation, and it lacked effective mitigation for impacts on public health. A successful CEQA suit by environmental groups and the Attorney General addressed the issue. The court did not invalidate the plan, but required SANDAG to properly mitigate its environmental and public health impacts. Over the years, the legislature has exempted or allowed ministerial approval of some types of green infrastructure. These projects were carefully selected, and exemptions were designed to avoid harm to communities and the environment. Some important exemptions include rooftop solar on existing buildings and parking lots, high-speed rail crossings, bus rapid transit, and bike lanes. In 2023, the legislature amended CEQA to expedite litigation, challenging a number of green infrastructure projects. The projects eligible for judicial streamlining were carefully selected. For example, for transportation projects, projects found to be exempt from CEQA must promote compact infill development, not impact disadvantaged communities, and not increase car travel. In each of these streamlining exemption bills, the legislature moved cautiously as it relaxed CEQA requirements. It received public input on these bills and made sure the changes to CEQA, 1. applied only to critical green projects, 2. were necessary for the project's implementation, and 3. were crafted to minimize harm to communities and the environment to the extent feasible. Any future CEQA exemptions must continue to be carefully and thoughtfully crafted. This presentation was brought by the organizations shown on this slide. These groups are all supporters of CEQA Works, a coalition of more than 200 environmental justice and conservation organizations dedicated to protecting and preserving CEQA. Thank you for your time today. If you have questions about this presentation, please contact one of the 4 people listed here.